Dr. Serena Holt. Early 30s. Long brown hair, green eyes, white coat over blue scrubs, a small silver pendant at her throat. A hospitalist physician at Greystone Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee, not yet 40, already carrying the particular quiet authority of someone who has seen enough to understand what matters and enough to know how rarely it gets said out loud. She moved through her rounds with the focused calm of a woman who had chosen this work on purpose and had never once regretted it, even on the hardest days. Ryan Mercer. Late 30s. Dark hair, short beard, broad-shouldered, resting in a hospital bed in room 412 with his eyes closed and monitors steady around him. Founder and majority owner of Mercer Capital Group, a private equity firm with holdings across 6 states, a downtown Nashville office on the 14th floor, and a personal net worth that had stopped being something Ryan thought about in specific numbers some years ago. He had been admitted 4 days ago following a cardiac episode. His vitals were stable. His prognosis was good. And he was, to the knowledge of every person on the 4th floor, completely unconscious. He was not completely unconscious. He had not been, in fact, for the last 36 hours. There are moments in a life when everything goes quiet. Not the quiet of peace, necessarily. The quiet of interruption. When the noise of everything you have built and managed and driven forward, all of it, stops. And in that sudden stillness, you find yourself hearing things you have never taken the time to hear before. Ryan Mercer was 41 years old when his heart decided, on a Tuesday evening in October, to make its first serious complaint. He had been at a dinner meeting. The kind he had 3 or 4 times a week, good restaurant, good wine, a conversation that was really a negotiation with a tablecloth over it. He had felt the tightening in his chest and had identified it, with the unhelpful precision of a man who has always been better at analyzing situations than responding to them, as something that required attention. He had excused himself. Walked calmly to the lobby. Called his driver. The driver had called 911 instead, which was the right decision and which Ryan had later been grateful for. He had been unconscious, genuinely, for the first 20 hours. When awareness returned, quietly, like a tide coming in, he had not announced it. He had not been entirely sure, in those first hours, that the awareness was reliable. The body plays tricks after a cardiac event. He had stayed still and listened to the room around him and waited. And then the listening had become something else. He had been still for 36 hours by the time he understood what he was doing. He was not pretending, precisely. He was not running an operation. He was a man who had stumbled into a kind of accidental invisibility, lying in a bed in a room where people moved and talked with the particular freedom of those who believe they are unobserved, and had found, in that invisibility, something he had not known he was missing. The truth of how people spoke when they didn't know he was listening. He was used to a particular version of the world. The version where people knew who he was before he entered the room. Where conversations were calibrated to him, his mood, his preferences, his history of responses. He had been living inside that version for 15 years, and he had not fully understood, until he lay still in a hospital bed, how much of what people said to him had been shaped by who they were saying it to. Here, in room 412, he was not Ryan Mercer of Mercer Capital Group. He was the patient in the bed. The man whose chart said cardiac event, stable, monitoring required. A body with numbers attached to it, requiring observation. And in that anonymity he heard things with a clarity he had not accessed in years. He heard the night orderly, a young man named Paul, tell his colleague in the hallway about his mother's hip surgery and the 2 buses he took to visit her after every shift, not complaining, just telling, in the matter-of-fact way of someone for whom difficulty is simply the texture of life. He heard the morning charge nurse, a woman named Barbara who sounded like someone's grandmother and probably was, quietly defend him to an impatient administrator who wanted the room turned over faster. "He's not ready," she said. Firm and plain and final. No drama. Just, he's not ready. He heard the monitor technician who came in at 2 in the morning to check readings, moving in the dark with practiced silence, checking each number with the focus of someone who understands that this is not a routine task, that these numbers belong to a person, that the person matters. And then, on the evening of the second full day, he heard Serena Holt. She came in at the end of her rounds. 8:40 in the evening. He had learned her footsteps by then, a particular rhythm, unhurried but precise, that he recognized before the door opened. She did what she always did. Checked the monitors. Made a note. Adjusted the 4-line with quiet competence. Then she stood for a moment at the foot of the bed, the way she sometimes did, not long, just a moment, looking at the chart, or perhaps at him, or perhaps at something no one else in the room could see. And then, in the way people speak sometimes when they believe they are alone with someone who cannot hear them, not to the room, not performing for anyone, just quietly releasing something that has been sitting in them all day, she said, "You had a harder night than your chart shows, didn't you?" It was not quite a question. "I've been watching your numbers all day. There's a pattern in the afternoon readings that I want to look at again tomorrow. I don't think you're as straightforward a case as we've been treating you." A pause. "I'm going to make sure we get it right." She said it the way a person says something they are telling themselves as much as anyone. A commitment made to the room, to the work, to whatever private standard of care she carried with her into every shift. Ryan lay still and felt something move through him that was not a symptom. She came back the next morning with a different kind of attention. She had, evidently, spent time with his chart overnight. She asked the resident to run a specific additional panel. She consulted, by phone outside his door, with a cardiologist colleague, and Ryan, whose hearing had sharpened considerably over 3 days of deliberate stillness, heard her say, "I know it's outside what the initial workup suggested. I just want to be sure. He's younger than this diagnosis usually presents. I want to rule out the secondary possibility." She was thorough in the way that costs something. The way that requires going back to a chart at the end of a long day and asking the question again that most people would have been satisfied to leave unanswered. The additional panel, as it turned out, flagged something. A secondary condition, manageable, treatable, but easily missed and consequential if missed. The kind of thing that would have been found eventually, probably. But eventually and now are not the same word. That morning, after the results came in, she came to his room again. She stood at his bedside. She reviewed the new findings quietly, speaking in the low voice she used when she was talking to herself. And then she said, "There you are. I thought so." Not triumphant. Just, "There you are." The quiet satisfaction of a person who went looking and found what they were looking for. Ryan opened his eyes. She did not startle. That was the first thing he noticed. A less composed person would have stepped back. She simply looked at him, those steady green eyes adjusting, recalibrating, and then she said, with the directness he had already come to recognize as simply how she spoke, "How long?" He considered a number of answers. "A while," he said. His voice was rougher than he expected from disuse. She nodded slowly. Not angry. Working through something. "The evening conversations," she said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I should be frustrated with you." "You probably should," he agreed. "I'm not," she said. "Mostly." A pause. "Are you in pain?" He almost laughed. She had just discovered that her patient had been conscious through multiple private conversations, and her first follow-up question was clinical. "No," he said. "No pain." She pulled the chair to his bedside and sat down. Not because the protocol required it. Because she had something to say and she preferred to say it at eye level. "I meant what I said," she told him. "All of it. That's not different because you were listening." "I know," he said. And he did. That was, in a way, the whole of it. His name, once the chart was properly reviewed, became known to the staff. There was a brief adjustment period, the particular institutional flutter that follows the discovery that a significant person has been present in an ordinary room. It passed relatively quickly. Greystone Medical Center was a serious institution with serious people who understood that a patient's net worth had no bearing on the care he needed. Serena did not treat him differently after that morning. She was, if anything, more direct with him than she might have been otherwise, as though the fact that he had heard her speak honestly in an empty room had established a kind of shorthand between them that she saw no reason to abandon. She explained the secondary diagnosis carefully. The treatment pathway. The monitoring required going forward. She answered his questions without the slight overcalibration that sometimes creeps in when physicians talk to patients who are used to being catered to. She spoke to him the way she spoke to everyone, which was the greatest respect she could have offered him. He noticed. He did not say so immediately. He was discharged on a Saturday morning. The kind of Nashville October morning that arrives bright and cool and smells like wood smoke and change. He dressed in his own clothes, the first time in a week, and sat on the edge of the bed waiting for the discharge paperwork, feeling the particular texture of being about to re-enter a life after an interruption. He thought about what he had heard from that bed over 5 days. Paul and his 2 buses to visit his mother. Barbara, steady as stone, telling an administrator that her patient was not ready. The technician in the dark, checking numbers that belonged to a person. Serena, standing at the foot of his bed at the end of a long day, making a private promise to a man she believed couldn't hear her. He had built a career, a successful one, by every measure the world uses, on the belief that information is power. That knowing more than the other person in the room gives you an advantage. He had gathered information his whole professional life with strategy and purpose. He had never gathered it like this. Lying still. Not looking for advantage. Just listening to people be themselves when they had no reason to be anything else. It was, he thought, the most valuable data he had ever collected. And it had cost him nothing except the willingness to be quiet. Serena came in to complete the discharge. She reviewed his medications, his follow-up schedule, the monitoring parameters she wanted his cardiologist to maintain. She was precise and clear and moved through the checklist with the focus of someone for whom discharge is not a formality but a final act of care. At the door she paused. "One more thing," she said. She turned back. "Whatever you heard, from anyone on this floor, I hope you'll hold it the way it was offered. Without an audience in mind." He looked at her. "I will," he said. She nodded. Apparently satisfied. He said, "Can I ask you something?" She waited. "Why did you come back to the chart? That second evening. You had a full day. It would have been easy not to." She considered the question as though it were genuinely new to her. "Because something felt unfinished," she said finally. "And unfinished things in this job have a way of costing people more than they should." She said it simply. Matter of fact. The way she said everything. As though there were no other possible answer. After she left, he sat with it for a moment. Then he gathered his things and walked out into the Nashville morning, breathing real air, carrying a corrected diagnosis and a still recovering heart and 5 days of listening that had, quietly and without announcement, corrected something in him that no panel and no chart had been tracking. 6 months later, he established an endowment at Greystone Medical Center. Not a naming opportunity. Not a wing with his family's name above the door. A fund, specifically structured to support extended staffing hours in the hospitalist program and to provide need-based educational grants for nursing staff pursuing advanced credentials. He named no one in the documentation. He left no note attached. Serena Holt learned about the endowment the same way the rest of the staff learned about it, through an internal announcement on a Tuesday morning. She read it at the nurse's station with her coffee going cold, and she was quiet for a moment after she finished. Then she put her coffee down and went to see her first patient of the day. Paul took his mother to dinner that month for the first time in years. The fund had covered the cost of the home care aid he hadn't been able to afford before. Barbara received word that her application for a continuing education program had been fully covered. The night technician found, without any explanation attached, that his student loan balance had been quietly and entirely resolved. None of them knew who had done it. That, Ryan had decided, was precisely the point. He had spent a week learning how people behave when they believe no one important is watching. He had spent 6 months making sure that the people who deserved better got it, quietly, without the theater of visible generosity, without the name above the door. The way, he had come to understand, that the best things are given. Perhaps this is what a long stillness teaches, if we are willing to enter it. That the world around us is full of people doing good work without recognition. Keeping their promises to empty rooms. Checking the numbers one more time. Taking 2 buses in the dark to visit a person they love. That we have been, many of us, too busy and too certain of our own importance to hear them clearly. And that the kindest thing a life can ask of us, the most clarifying, the most humbling, the most quietly transforming, is simply this. To stop. To be still. To listen. Really listen. To what the room says when it thinks no one important is paying attention.